All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready. What are we tackling today?
Well, today we're diving into a question that's probably sparked a few debates among us Potterheads.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Who's the stronger wizard, Voldemort or Dumbledore?
The age-old question. I see we're going for a truly epic showdown this time.
You know it. We've got this fascinating article that really breaks down their powers, personalities, all that good stuff.
That sounds like a good read.
It is. And it gets you thinking, like, what does strength really mean in the wizarding world? Is it all about raw power, or is there something more to it?
It's a great point. I mean, you've got these two incredibly powerful wizards, but their paths and how they approach magic are completely different.
Right. Like, take Voldemort, for example. His story is almost like a cautionary tale, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He starts as Tom Riddle, abandoned as a baby, grows up in this really bleak muggle orphanage.
Yeah, not exactly the best start in life for developing empathy and healthy relationships.
Exactly. And you can see how that lack of love and connection early on really warped his view of the world. He became fixated on power as the only way to guarantee his own safety and control.
Makes you wonder if things could have been different if he'd had, a more loving upbringing.
Yeah, it's a question a lot of fans have asked over the years.
Mm.
But even Dumbledore, when he met Tom as a boy at the orphanage, he sensed this kind of potent mix of magical brilliance, but also this really disturbing hunger for power.
So even at that young age, there were already signs of what he'd become.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was brilliant at Hogwarts, charming even,
Yeah.
but there was always that darkness kind of lurking beneath the surface.
Right, like that whole Chamber of Secrets incident when he was just a teenager.
Exactly. Unleashing a terrifying monster on the school. And, not to mention, he created his first Horcrux, that diary.
Okay, hold on. I think we need to back up for a second for anyone who hasn't brushed up on their Horcruxes lately.
Sure.
What makes them so significant and so dark?
Right, so creating a Horcrux is like this super complex and forbidden act of dark magic. Basically, you're splitting your soul, and you're hiding a piece of it in an object.
And that's what grants a twisted form of immortality, right?
Exactly. So even if your body is destroyed, part of your soul lives on, tethered to this world through these objects. But the process is incredibly damaging.
In what way?
Well, with each Horcrux that Voldemort created, he was chipping away at his own humanity. He was becoming less and less human, and more like this sort of monstrous entity, totally fixated on survival at any cost.
That's pretty messed up, even for Voldemort.
Yeah, it really gives you a glimpse into how far he was willing to go, how warped his perspective had become.
It also shows just how terrified he was of death, how obsessed he was with maintaining power and control, to the point where he was willing to sacrifice his very soul.
And that fear of death, that inability to accept his own mortality, is key to understanding why he was so obsessed with power. He was trying to build this impenetrable fortress around himself, using magic as his weapon and fear as his shield.
So let's talk about that raw magical power for a minute. I mean, the guy was basically a walking arsenal of dark spells, right?
Oh, absolutely. Voldemort was insanely gifted, especially when it came to the dark arts. He was a master of curses, particularly the killing curse, which he used with, well, terrifying efficiency.
Yeah, not someone you'd want to run into in a dark alley.
No, definitely not. But beyond the curses, his dueling skills were legendary. I mean, the guy was known for his speed, his precision, just his ability to think strategically during a battle. He could really size up an opponent quickly and exploit their weaknesses.
The article also mentions legilimency and occlumency. What were those again?
Oh, right. Those are advanced forms of mental magic.
Yeah.
Legilimency allows you to kind of penetrate another person's mind, read their thoughts and emotions, maybe even plan suggestions.
They're like mind control.
In a way, yeah. Pretty creepy stuff. And then occlumency, that's the art of shielding your own mind from intrusion.
Oh, so it's like mental defense.
Exactly. And Voldemort was a master of both,
Right.
which, made him incredibly difficult to deceive or manipulate. He could pry into your deepest secrets while keeping his own thoughts completely hidden.
So we're talking about a wizard with immense power and this deeply disturbing desire for control. That's a pretty scary combination.
I'm sure. But even Voldemort, powerful as he wasn't unbeatable. He had his weaknesses.
Okay, so what brought down this seemingly invincible Dark Lord?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of Voldemort's strengths, the very things that made him so formidable, they also led to his downfall.
How so?
Well, for one, He completely refused to acknowledge the power of emotions. He saw things like love and compassion as weaknesses.
He was all about logic and power.
Right. And this fundamental flaw in his thinking, it blinded him to the true power of love, its ability to connect people, to inspire courage and self-sacrifice.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? He spent his whole life chasing immortality, splitting his soul into pieces, all because he couldn't understand or accept the enduring power of love.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what made him vulnerable. His obsession with power and control, his inability to form any kind of genuine connection, it left him isolated. He might have inspired fear, but he never earned true loyalty, and that's a really shaky foundation for any kind of lasting influence.
So it seems like strength isn't just about raw magical ability, but also about character, emotional intelligence, understanding those deeper forces that are at play in the world.
You hit the nail on the head,
Yeah.
and those are areas where Dumbledore really excelled. But we'll delve into that more after a short break.
All right, so we've talked about Voldemort and his rather twisted path to power.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture.
It is, but then you have Dumbledore. I mean, his whole approach to power and leadership seems to have been shaped by a totally different set of experiences, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with Dumbledore, you see uh, a more nuanced story, a story of, incredible triumphs, but also profound losses.
Yeah, the article mentions like the early tragedies he faced, family turmoil, the burden of responsibility, and then the heartbreaking loss of his younger sister, Ariana.
Right. And, all of those experiences, while incredibly painful, they really shaped him, forged within him this deep understanding of human nature, the complexities of it.
And probably made him very aware of, how seductive power can be and the importance of compassion and, all those things that Voldemort seemed to completely reject.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's reflected in how he led Hogwarts. It wasn't about dominance or control. It was about guidance, mentorship, really nurturing young minds and encouraging them to choose the path of light.
So less rule with an iron fist and more guide with a gentle hand, maybe even a twinkle in the eye.
Ah, exactly. I mean, he was certainly a figure of authority, but he is also beloved by the students. He had this way of making you feel seen and heard, even if you weren't the most gifted student.
Okay, but let's not forget, Dumbledore was an exceptionally skilled wizard in his own right. I mean, he wasn't just a wise old mentor.
Oh, absolutely not. This guy was the real deal when it came to magic. He was unparalleled in transfiguration, changing an object's form.
Yeah. I mean, you think back to that duel with Voldemort at the Ministry of Magic, that was mind-blowing.
Seriously, the way he was manipulating the environment, turning those statues into living creatures, it was like watching a masterclass in magic.
Total wizarding rock star moment.
And then you think about his expertise in alchemy. That's some seriously deep magic.
Yeah, what's the significance of that again? I mean, beyond just being super impressive.
Well, alchemy delves into like the ancient secrets of magic. It's this blend of, magical theory, potion making, even a bit of science thrown in there.
So it's not just like waving a wand and chanting a spell. It's like a whole other level of understanding the fundamental forces of magic.
Exactly. And the fact that Dumbledore worked with Nicholas Flamel, the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, I mean, that tells you something about the depth of his knowledge in this field.
So we're talking about a guy who's not only a skilled duelist and a transfiguration whiz, but also a scholar who's like delving into the deepest mysteries of magic. Pretty impressive resume.
No kidding. But, the article also points out that for all his strengths, Dumbledore wasn't perfect.
Ah, so even the wisest and most powerful wizard has his flaws.
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Not even Dumbledore.
So what were some of his weaknesses?
Well, he could be really reluctant to act decisively sometimes, and he had this tendency to manipulate events from the shadows.
Okay, interesting. Why do you think he did that?
Well, it seems like those strategies were kind of born out of a deep-seated fear of the corrupting influence of power. He'd seen firsthand how power could twist even the most well-intentioned people, and he was determined to avoid making the same mistakes.
It's like he was so afraid of becoming another Grindelwald or even another Voldemort that he went too far in the other direction.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that he was constantly wrestling with this burden of knowledge, the weight of responsibility, and also, the fear of repeating past mistakes.
So it's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can grapple with self-doubt and, those inner demons that we all face. It makes him seem a lot more human.
Right, and it makes his accomplishments all the more impressive because, he achieved all of this while also battling his own internal struggles.
Okay, so we've talked about their backgrounds, their powers, their flaws, all that good stuff. But let's get to the heart of this deep dive. Who was truly stronger, Voldemort or Dumbledore?
All right, let's settle this once and for all.
Well, I don't know about settling it definitively, but let's at least hash it out.
Fair enough.
Hmm.
So, if we're talking purely about raw magical power, Voldemort was a force to be reckoned with. There's no denying that.
Right, but Dumbledore had his own brand of power, right? It was more about strategy, control, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It was Evan just brute force with Dumbledore. Remember that duel at the Ministry? He didn't just match Voldemort blow for blow, he outmaneuvered him. He used his deep understanding of magic and of Voldemort's own psychology to gain the upper hand.
So it was almost like a chess match where he was always thinking a few moves ahead.
Exactly. And that's where his wisdom really came into play. Voldemort was often driven by rage and this thirst for immediate power. But Dumbledore was playing the long game. He was always thinking about the bigger picture, the long-term consequences of his actions.
And that's where I think the emotional aspect comes in too, right? Because that's a place where Dumbledore really had an edge over Voldemort.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dumbledore understood the power of love, of compassion, of self-sacrifice. Those were things that Voldemort dismissed as weakness, but Dumbledore recognized them as sources of strength.
It's like that saying, the greatest weapon against darkness is light.
Exactly. Dumbledore embraced the power of love and compassion. But Voldemort, he remained trapped in this cycle of fear and isolation. And that difference is reflected in their legacies.
How so?
Well, Dumbledore inspired hope. He inspired resilience. He inspired this belief in the power of good to triumph over evil. But Voldemort's legacy, that's a legacy of fear and destruction. He might have ruled through intimidation, but that kind of power is fleeting. It doesn't last.
Yeah, it makes you think. What's the point of achieving immortality if all you leave behind is a trail of fear and destruction? Whereas Dumbledore, even in death, he continues to inspire people.
That's a powerful point.
Mm.
It really highlights the difference between these two wizards. True strength isn't just about individual power. It's about the impact you have on others, the legacy you leave behind. And Dumbledore understood that true power lies in uplifting others, in inspiring hope, in building a world based on compassion and understanding.
So it seems like while Voldemort might have had raw magical ability, Dumbledore's strength ran much deeper. He embodied this more holistic kind of power. It wasn't just about spells and wands. It was about wisdom, compassion, strategic thinking, the ability to inspire.
Exactly. He was a master of magic, yes, but more importantly, he was a master of himself. He understood his own weaknesses, and he learned to use them to his advantage.
This article mentions how J.K. Rowling once said that Dumbledore was the only wizard Voldemort ever truly feared. What do you think she meant by that?
Hmm, that's an interesting point. I think it speaks to the kind of power that Voldemort could never possess. Dumbledore wasn't just a powerful wizard, he was a symbol of hope. He represented everything that Voldemort hated and feared. Love, compassion, unity, the courage to stand up for what's right.
And Voldemort, being so consumed by fear and this desire for control, he just couldn't comprehend that kind of strength. He couldn't grasp the power of selflessness, of sacrificing one's own needs for the greater good. It just didn't compute in his worldview.
It's like trying to explain the concept of color to someone who's been blind their whole life. They just don't have the framework to understand it.
And it's interesting how this theme, this battle between like fear and love, control versus compassion, it plays out in the real world too, not just in the wizarding world. I mean, you see it in leadership, in politics, even in our everyday interactions.
Oh, absolutely. You think about leaders who build walls and sow division versus those who build bridges and foster unity. Dumbledore, despite his flaws, he ultimately chose the path of connection, of understanding, of believing in the inherent good within people. And that's a really powerful message, especially in the world we live in today.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always a choice. We can choose to succumb to fear and division, or we can choose to embrace compassion, understanding, and the belief that we're stronger together.
And that choice, that individual act of choosing light over darkness, that's where true strength lies. It's not about magical abilities or political power. It's about the values we uphold, the actions we take, and the way we treat each other.
Well, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We started with this seemingly simple question: who's stronger, Voldemort or Dumbledore? But it's turned into this much richer conversation about the nature of power, the importance of character, and this enduring battle between darkness and light that exists, within us all.
And it's a conversation that's definitely worth continuing, both in our own lives and in the wider world. What kind of strength do we value? What kind of world do we want to create? These are big questions, but they're important ones to consider.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you most from this deep dive? How do you define strength, both in the wizarding world and in your own life? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments.
And if this has sparked your curiosity, go back and revisit the Harry Potter books or movies. You might be surprised by how much deeper the themes resonate now that you're older and, have a bit more life experience under your belt.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But don't worry, we've got a cauldron full of exciting topics brewing for future episodes. Everything from the science of decision making to the history of language. We're going to be exploring it all. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out.
And until next time, keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and never stop exploring the magic of the world around you.
Beautifully said. Until next time, everyone.